Thank you so much. My name is Jacob, Dr. Jacob, and it is my pleasure to be here with you this evening. I'm the founding executive director of the Global Center for Rehumanizing Democracy, and I wish to welcome you to the digital battlefield of truth from democracy, AI, and the Freedom to Learn Survival Curriculum for the 21st Century lecture series. This webinar is sponsored by Alt Liberal Arts, and Alt Liberal Arts is a global education initiative concerned with freedom to learn, civic engagement, and the advancement of the liberal arts. In collaboration with Bard College and the Global Higher Education Alliance for the 21st Century, Alt Liberal Arts offers free global online lectures and courses for which you can register at altliberalarts.org. These lectures would not be possible without the support from the Open Society Foundation and Bard College. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of this screen where you can enter your questions or comments throughout this online seminar, and I look forward to discussing as many of your questions as time allows. So with that introduction out of the way, I will be sharing my screen shortly. I have a few slides to show, but my story starts, I probably should start with my own personal story and then get on to the topic for today. So I'm from Calabar. Calabar is a small city in southeastern Nigeria. Well, I'm trying to share my screen, so give me a sec. I'll do that shortly. So I'm from a small town in southeastern Nigeria, and I was born just a few years after the Nigerian Biafran Civil War, and I think a lot of people may not really know much about that war. My parents had fled there, had fled to Calabar in the late 1960s at the height of the Nigeria Biafra Civil War. And my mother was 12 when the war started, and she was forced to flee when fighting reached her hometown, and her education was disrupted, and she never went back to school, essentially. She and thousands of other displaced persons were taken in at a camp that was set up by the International Committee, the Red Cross, and the Nigerian Red Cross Society in Calabar. And it was there that she met my father. I actually have a picture so that I can share. Excellent. So that's the little town southeast of Nigeria. And the war actually started in 1967. If you, for those of you that don't know so much about the Nigeria Biafra Civil War, you can check out the CNN web page dedicated to photos and stories about the war. So that's me. Yep, right there. And I got to learn about the war, the Nigeria Biafra Civil War, from my mother, because she it was, I guess, her own way of dealing with the trauma of the war. So I grew up listening to stories about the war and what she went through, how the war affected her community. And she told stories of relatives that were killed, some were raped, some were tortured and left to die. I was probably 4 or 5 or thereabout, as long as I can remember. And like I said, looking back, it was her own way of dealing with the trauma of the war. So I grew up as if I'd experienced the war myself. And I think that's what psychologists call post-memory. But there was another story actually that also shaped my entire career. My father had learned during the war to repair radios, and during the war at the displacement camps, people relied on their radio sets to know what was happening. Their safety and their emotional survival depended on access to factual and reliable information. And radio provided that. So my father somehow became indispensable to the community because, in a crisis, the most valued asset is not only food or shelter, but it's also information, reliable information, because it's from there that people get to understand their vulnerabilities and then negotiate their resilience in that circumstance. So that is how I grew up learning not just about the human dimension of war, but also about the power of information in times of crisis and uncertainty. Fast forward several years later, that childhood understanding led me to the Democratic Republic of Congo. I was doing my PhD at the University of Leeds in the UK. And I studied Radio Okapi, the UN mission's radio service in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Then it was the largest, most expensive UN radio deployment in history, covering a country the size of Western Europe. And I was interested in how information interventions shape conflict environments, specifically how well-intentioned programs designed in the case of the DRC to convince rebel fighters that were from Rwanda and were mostly responsible for the genocide of the Tutsi to disarm. And I found through the research in practice that those programs were actually doing more harm than good. Because radio is ubiquitous in that sense. So programs designed for one audience are heard by other audiences. So I found, that the program, by consistently broadcasting appeals in the language of the Hutu fighters, trying to get them to lay down their weapons and take on and accept the DDR processes, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration processes that were implemented by the UN. By consistently broadcasting those appeals in the language of the Hutu, there was gradually an epistemic association, if you like, between the war and the Hutu in the minds of the Congolese civilians. And this also affected, of course, lots of Hutus who were resident as refugees as well in Eastern DRC and who had even settled, some had intermarried. So an information environment was created inadvertently that had devastating consequences on social cohesion because people were essentially associating the Hutu, even the civilian ones, with the war. I published my findings, and the attention of the United Nations was drawn to the program, and the program was eventually reviewed and terminated. Not long after, I was consulted by the UN to help revise the module on strategic communication in support of the integrated DDR standards. It taught me two key lessons that have guided my work ever since. First, research can have real-world consequences, and our scholarship can actually save lives. The second, scholars have a responsibility to engage with policymakers, to make their findings available and their recommendations actionable in that sense. And I have to say, just because of my own upbringing, I've always been drawn to areas of conflict. In northeast Nigeria, I worked at the American University in Nigeria, based in Yola, very close to the epicenter of the Boko Haram insurgency. And with the support of USAID, we provided education to tens of thousands of children that had been displaced by the insurgency and forced out of school. And the experience somehow, to a very high extent, mirrored my mother's own experience. So we designed instructional radio programs for them that also reflected their lived experience. That model was later adopted by the World Bank and the Nigerian government to provide education for primary school and high school students in that region during COVID-19. Again, the lesson was the same. Scholarship must be attentive to the needs of society, and knowledge that does not serve human dignity is fundamentally incomplete. So why am I telling you these stories? Well, as scholars and researchers, we often talk about our research interest without really talking about our why we research what we research, what within us connects with the topics that we are researching, to not just the topics in that sense as a subject, but also the object, if you like, of our research, or perhaps what rises in recognition within us when we encounter the societies and the topics that we investigate. And I share this today because we're in the age, because of AI, this matters now more than ever. We are losing gradually our relationship with the process of knowing. What is known is becoming more important than the knowing process. And AI, interestingly, it doesn't have a history, it doesn't have a personal story in that sense. It does not have a passion or a why, but it does have outputs. And increasingly, we are mistaking those outputs for real knowledge. But our personal stories, our histories, our love, who we are as distinct from what we know will become increasingly important in the years ahead. And this is what really keeps us human. The end product, of course, the knowledge matters, but so does the knower, the human being who interacts with that knowledge, who brings experience, who brings judgment and moral weight to bear upon that knowledge. I've heard AI being compared to the printing press, or to maybe the invention of writing, but I think it's a lot more than that. When Marshall McLuhan, often called the father of modern media and communication, uh, when he wrote about the global village, the internet was still decades away. In his tetrad of media effect, he argued that new media technologies enhance capabilities and also retrieve lost abilities, but they also reverse and render some capabilities obsolete. My 14-year-old son and I have been having conversations recently about his handwriting. And he keeps telling me, look, Dad, nobody writes with their handwriting anymore. And most people type, 99% of people type 99% of the time, he says. And he keeps saying you don't need a good handwriting. As hard as it is for me to accept, he's actually right. Handwriting is gradually becoming obsolete, especially with that generation right before our eyes. We all know what AI is enhancing, but what will it reverse? What will it render obsolete? And most urgently, how will it affect our relationship with knowledge and our ability to think freely, especially when it is weaponized? My mother's survival and the people of that, the displaced people in that region and in Congo, they depended on radio and the information that it carried. In Northeast Nigeria, I saw how education rooted in lived experience could also rebuild lives. Today, the information environment itself is being re-engineered, not by well-meaning institutions like in the case of the UN mission in Congo making mistakes but by authoritarian actors deliberately weaponizing AI to manipulate how entire populations think, how they feel, how they decide. And the scale is unprecedented. The sophistication is unlike anything we have faced before. And the institutions best equipped to respond, our universities, are not paying as much attention as they should. So, how did we get here? How did we start studying AI-enhanced reflexive control? And by the way, there's a recent book published very recently, AI and the Future of Democracy, where I am the co-editor with a colleague at the American University in Bulgaria. AI and the Future of Democracy, Building Resilient and Inclusive Societies. The second chapter there, it's myself and Georgi Angelov, my colleague at Sensika Technologies, are the authors of that of chapter 2 in that book. And we've written about mostly pretty much everything that I'm sharing in this, I'll be sharing in this lecture. So how did we get here? First, we started this work by studying the Pravda network. Today, by the this is the menu. I'll talk about the Pravda network. I'll talk about the AI enhanced reflexive control framework, and I'll look at Bulgaria as a case study. Then I'll discuss the impact, and then we'll close from there. I'll share some of the key findings from the Pravda network operations. But let me just say this, that we did not set out originally, Georgi and I did not set out originally to study AI-enhanced reflexive control. Through the Disinformation Observatory, a partnership between ourselves and Sensika, we began tracking a network of websites operating under the name Pravda. Pravda is a Russian word for truth. The irony, I have to say, is not accidental. The Pravda network traces back to 2011, when a Russian IT specialist began creating news aggregation websites focused on the Crimea. And what started as regional content aggregation evolved around 2022 into something that was far more ambitious, a sophisticated information influence apparatus with global reach. And forensic analysis by the Atlantic Council's DFR lab links its infrastructure to TigerWeb. And TigerWeb is it's a Crimea-based IT company with documented connections to Russian occupation authorities. So by early 2025, the Pravda ecosystem had grown to include several hundred news aggregator websites, 140 subdomains, targeting over 83 countries, and content in dozens of languages, including not just major European languages, but minority languages. The site are fully automated, reposting content from Russian news sources, social media, and Telegram channels without any original reporting. And content is systematically translated to penetrate non-Russian information environments and to also circumvent sanctions. As I'm sure you know, Russia today is sanctioned in most of Europe, but through the Pravda network, they're able to circumvent that sanction. So the Pravda news in that sense is not a news operation; it's an infrastructure. And what the data revealed was striking. We analyzed the network's output over a 3-month period, from December 2024 to March 2025, and the numbers stunned us. We found that within just 3 months, the Pravda network produced 643,601 publications across 45 countries. Let me say that again. They produced 643,601 publications across 45 countries. So that's nearly 650,000 articles in 90 days, roughly 7,000 articles per day, every day without pause. But the volume alone was not the revelation. It was really the pattern. And the network was not targeting everyone equally. It was not broadcasting to the world in that sense. It was surgically focused on specific countries that were previously under the Soviet sphere of influence. And the targeting followed clear geopolitical patterns. And the most targeted nations were Moldova, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. And we also found that former Soviet states and Balkan nations accounted for 52% of all publications, despite representing only approximately 9% of the total population across the analyzed countries. And this is a disproportionate focus that cannot be explained by market size, media consumption, or organic interest. And the publication intensity per capita was as much as 56 times higher in the most targeted countries compared to Western democracies. And it was interesting because this was not random. It was more of a map of strategic priorities. Now, some analysts suggested that the Pravda network's primary purpose was what's being called LLM, or large language model grooming, deliberately flooding the internet with millions of articles designed for AI consumption, with the strategic objective of permanently embedding Russian narratives into the knowledge base of large language models. And there's sufficient evidence for this, indeed. As a matter of fact, a March 2025 report identified that the network had expanded to 182 domains in 12 languages and was producing content designed primarily to be ingested by AI systems. But analysis suggested something far more insidious. Because the more we looked at the data, the more we felt that if the sole purpose were to poison AI training data, you would not need this level of geographic precision. You would not need to target Moldova, for example. For example, the targeting of Moldova was significantly higher than other countries. You would need to target Moldova some 56 times the rate of Western Europe. You would not need to calibrate intensity gradients that decrease gradually within regions rather than sharply between them. And you would need to really focus so much on frontier states at the NATO-Russian boundary. So you would normally just simply flood the internet everywhere. So the reach and the targeting pattern told us that this was about something that was more insidious. And the Pravda network's purpose was indeed to flood the information ecosystem of targeted countries with a semblance of coherence. So let's think for a moment about what this means in practice. A citizen in Moldova or Bulgaria encounters a narrative. Let's say a narrative that says that the EU threatens our economic sovereignty. And they see a version of it on Facebook. They see a related article in a local news site. They hear it discussed in a Telegram group. They encounter a variation on TikTok. Each source appears independent, but each iteration is slightly different, adapted to the platform, to the audience, to the cultural context. But all of them converge on the same worldview. The citizen is not told what to think. They're being given an information environment in which a particular conclusion appears obvious, appears organic, and appears independently validated. They believe that they're thinking for themselves. And that is the entire point. And I should say that this is not propaganda in the traditional sense. This is the construction of a synthetic information reality and engineered epistemic environments that's designed to make predetermined conclusions feel like common sense. And this is when we realized that we were looking at something that had, excuse me, that had a name in the intelligence literature, something that Soviet military psychologists had theorized about in the 1960s, but had not really been able to deploy at scale. And that was reflexive control. It is only now that it can be deployed at scale when it's enhanced by AI. So we went into, we drilled in to see what it looked like in the context of Bulgaria, where we were located and had a lot of research infrastructure on ground. But first, before I go into the findings from Bulgaria, what really is reflexive control? These are the core principles. It seeks to manipulate the decision-making environment, influencing the perception of reality to induce predictable decisions. The nature of effect is second order, so it's not necessarily intended to tell anybody to do A or to do B. The intention is to change the information environment in a way that would trigger specific psychological responses. And the intention really is to create this perception of autonomy, so that targets believe, or targeted audiences believe, that they're making independent choices. Originally, reflexive control, or traditional reflexive control, was based on manual content creation. It was limited in scale. The adaptation was slow, and the targeting was broad and with human limited feedback. But when it's AI enhanced, it gives it remarkable capability. First, the content generation is AI enhanced. So you're talking about computational content generation, unprecedented scale, real-time optimization, precision targeting, and dynamic narrative evolution. I'll talk about this in a moment. But I should just say that in analysis of the AI-enhanced reflective control framework, we found 5 dimensions based on the operations in Bulgaria, starting from algorithmic amplification, distributing content for maximum impact, then computational content generation, predictive audience modeling, which identifies vulnerabilities and targets, then dynamic narrative evolution, adapting narratives and targeting to changing conditions, then feedback-driven optimization, which continuously refines the operation. That is the model, and that is based on what we observed in Bulgaria. But the question is, why Bulgaria? Why was Bulgaria vulnerable? And towards the end, I'll talk about why Bulgaria is also resilient. Bulgaria is a transitional democracy in that sense. It's only had democracy for just over 30 years. And it has very complex, you would say, historical ties to Russia. It's strategically located in NATO's southeastern flank. And it has institutional vulnerabilities. There's low media literacy when compared with other EU member states. It has significant energy dependency on Russian imports. There's also the cultural and religious connections with Russia. And one key element as well is the dual identity tension. There is the tension between NATO and EU membership and historical Russia alignment. This in many ways, you can see that there are 4 core broad areas of vulnerability. There's the historical and cultural vulnerability. There's the economic and energy vulnerability. There's the institutional media vulnerability. And of course, there's also the geopolitical position as well. Our methodology in studying the Pravda network in Bulgaria between December 2024 and April 2025 involved different methodologies for data collection and network analysis, where we had to use Sensika's brilliant tech system to monitor and analyze the networks across different social media platforms, then content analysis and the propagation analysis, how content seeded and migrated across different platforms. One of the things that was very interesting is the more we observed the patterns of the network was that there was what you would call a hub and spoke topology that was centered on Pravda Bulgaria. I mean, there was a whole ecosystem built around Pravda Bulgaria. And that ecosystem included direct Kremlin assets, Kremlin sources, and more significantly, a whole network of local amplifiers were built across the entire ecosystem. I will talk in a moment about how the transition from Russian sources to Bulgarian or local Bulgarian amplifiers. But the narratives, in terms of the stories, narratives are, you can see narratives as stories about stories. We uncovered 5 primary narrative typologies. One was war propaganda, pro-Russian military narratives that was emphasizing Russian victories and Ukrainian losses. There was also anti-EU stroke NATO narratives that was portraying Western institutions as threats to Bulgarian sovereignty and stability. There was also the neutrality calls, advocating for Bulgaria to remain neutral and to exit Western alliances. And the most very interesting one was the energy crisis, highlighting Europe's energy vulnerability. And this was quite high during the winter months, and dependence narratives. Then economic doom, predicting financial collapse from Western alignment and the euro adoption. And we also observed the narrative evolution, how it evolved significantly over time. And you could see that over time, as the winter months passed, and as the circumstances evolved in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, the stories kept shifting. And one of the things that we observed was that as winter was coming to an end, diplomatic themes overtook military, and also Bulgarian anti-Europe protests were covered more significantly, and different stories that were more focused on domestic issues in Bulgaria. A core theme that I think it's possible to do it that way. Right. And one of the things that we observed in our study was that the content that was targeted at Bulgaria was different between, content targeted at Bulgaria. There were 2 categories of content. There was English content and there was the Bulgarian content. The Bulgarian content, and both are targeted at Bulgaria. It was Pravda Bulgaria. They had the English version and they also had the Bulgarian version. But the contents were quite different, because the audience is interested or reading the English version or the English content were different from audiences primarily reading the Bulgarian content. and we observed key differences between both content or contents for both groups. And these are the core analysis that emerged from our research. The US role for the Bulgarian contents, the US was portrayed as an unreliable partner that's likely to abandon our lives. In the English content, the US was portrayed as a malign warmonger prolonging the conflict. EU was portrayed in the Bulgarian version as weak, as divided, economically collapsing. And in the English version, it was portrayed as being aggressive and subservient to the US. And for local issues, there was a heavy focus on Bulgarian politics and energy and the euro. Not as much, really, with the English version. Then cultural references as well, historical ties, Orthodox Brotherhood in the Bulgarian version. Not so much so in the English language version. In terms of the tone, the emotional tone, the Bulgarian version was more, it had this strong nationalist indignation and this sense of victimhood. The English version was more analytical and more predictive of global doom. And this is actually what the narratives look like in terms of actual counts over the period of analysis. The Bulgarian content had more war stories, a lot more compared to the English content, had more stories about economic crisis, again, compared to the English version, more stories about energy crisis compared to the English version. And the call for neutrality and peace in terms of that's the need for Bulgaria to think more peacefully, not to be involved in the Ukrainian conflict in any kind of way, in the Russia-Ukrainian conflict in any kind of way. There was a lot more. There was a lot more from the English, more English content compared to Bulgarian content, and anti-NATO stroke anti-EU is still more Bulgarian content, but pretty much close to each other in terms of the English and Bulgarian content. And this is also the general focus, another way of presenting this. One of the things that we also found, which was quite striking, was the cross-platform propagation ecosystem. We observed, I think, let me show this just here. I will share these slides, by the way, so that because this was, I couldn't just expand this so well. The cross-platform ecosystem that was built was really interesting. There was a whole ecosystem built around Telegram, a whole ecosystem built around websites, a whole ecosystem built around Facebook, a whole ecosystem built around other social media platforms, TikTok, YouTube, and so on and so forth. And the intention really here was to ensure maximum platform-specific engagement, while also creating the illusion that multiple independent sources have arrived at the same conclusions. So if you are on Facebook, you see a particular content from a different source, and you are on a website, a different source, but there's an alignment in terms of worldview. Then the same then you get onto Facebook, there's also an alignment from a different source about a particular worldview. Then you get onto another platform, whether it's TikTok and so on and so forth. And it creates this sense of coherence, this sense of consensus. So the information environment is manipulated in that sense to ensure that there are multiple amplifiers and transmitters, if you like, that transmit a particular worldview across different channels without indicating, without showing where the sources are, but we're able to track these sources across different platforms. And the interesting thing about this was that in terms of content seeding and transformation, the original propaganda first appears on Telegram. That was the pattern. And then content is then repackaged with new bylines for Facebook distribution. And the same narratives were adapted to platform-specific formats, short clips, for example, for TikTok. And in terms of audience targeting, Facebook groups targeted older voters and rural audiences, and TikTok and YouTube targeted younger populations. Nationalist Facebook groups focused on identity-based messaging. And amplification methods, there was the cross-posting of identical content across platforms, using the Pravda BG website as the legitimate source to cite. So there were posts on Facebook and across social media platforms linking back to the same source, which is the Pravda BG website, but then with a unique lens by a particular source that was targeted at the different audience based on the nature of the platform. The other thing was the obscuring of sources or origins. Russian source material is laundered through multiple Bulgarian channels, and content is translated and culturally adapted for Bulgarian context. And new bylines and sources are created to hide the original the Russian origins. So, and the multi-platform approach indeed creates this illusion of widespread consensus. And in that sense, the appeal is almost auto-suggested. It seems as if it's organic, coming from society itself, whereas it wasn't so. Another thing that we observed, which was very interesting through the period of the study, even into April, was the gradual shift from Russian sources to local or Bulgarian sources. We observed that although content, in terms of actual numbers of content or posts increased, there was a steady decline, and we could not find any explanation for that decline for Russian sources or Russian citations, but there was increasing Bulgarian citations. And what we noticed during the period was that there was an active cultivation of local amplifiers all through the period, so that the messaging appeared not to be from Russian sources, but from Bulgarian sources. So the essence of this is with what effect? What was the impact? I mean, the impact of this kind of attack was not within. We did not set out to study the impact, so it wasn't within the remit of the study. But one of the things we found about Bulgaria was that there are various resilience factors that could limit the effectiveness of these approaches, or that limited their effectiveness, and worth mentioning. Number one is the demographic resistance. Urban populations, higher education groups, and younger citizens under 30, they show greater resilience with diverse media consumption and critical thinking skills. Then, of course, the civil society in Bulgaria is strong. They've got their limitations, of course, but there are lots of fact-checking initiatives, and in independent media, they're operating on that difficult environment. But they have enhanced. They've developed the capacity to identify and counter disinformation. Then, despite internal debates, Bulgaria's institutional commitments to NATO and the EU has created that structural inertia, I would say, against strategic reorientation. Bulgaria's, I'm sure you know, has recently, as recently as last month, fully adopted the euro. The cultural countercurrents, of course, there's significant pro-European cultural sentiment, particularly among younger Bulgarians who identify with European values and freedoms. But these are factors that can potentially that limit effectiveness and can potentially continue to do so if further strengthened. What's the deeper purpose of AI-enhanced reflexive control? Well, the Pravda operation in Bulgaria is not merely, I should say, trying to change what Bulgarians believe, but rather where they feel they belong. And this is something I found very interesting indeed. It is really an exercise in refurnishing the cognitive architecture of Bulgarian society. And the AI-enhanced reflexive control operations understand that belonging actually precedes belief. And by creating a network of fold amplifiers that simulates community and consensus, they tap into that fundamental human desire to find our place in a coherent social and cognitive universe. And once people feel that they belong to a particular narrative ecosystem, their beliefs will align accordingly through the natural human drive for consistency. Because we all look for consistency. We all look for that cognitive consistency. Who else believes what we believe? But when that is manipulated, it creates a significant threat in any society's information environment. Now, my concluding thought is that the space for independent thought or independent thinking is shrinking. And when thinking of AI-enhanced reflexive control, we should look at it not just as a technical or an informational threat, but an existential threat. Because as the information environment becomes more algorithmically curated, more echo chamber driven, more adaptive to individual preferences, the space for genuine debate, for dissent, for independent thinking will shrink. And people will think more uniformly, not because they have been censored, but because the informational raw material from which they form opinions has been engineered to produce convergence. A class I teach, we recently found, I teach currently, recently found that an assignment that was a writing assignment that was given to students to they were given an assignment to read a material and then post their comments. We found that all the comments looked alike. They all looked very similar. There was no discrimination. There was no independence of thought. It looked as if everybody wrote, basically copied from each other. I mean, different words, of course, but the thinking was fundamentally the same, meaning that they're all drawn from the same source. And authoritarian actors understand this. They will find increasingly sophisticated ways to use these tools to manufacture that synthetic consensus or that consent, not through force, not through censorship, but through the systematic engineering of information environment, in which the right choice appears just obvious and natural. So my concluding thought here is, for today's session, is that cognitive freedom, the freedom to form our own thought, will be the defining civil liberty of the AI age. And universities have a significant role to play in this. In the next session, I will go into discussions about the liberal arts as a civic infrastructure. How do we confront AI-enhanced reflexive control's deepest threat, which is the exploitation of the human need for belonging and cognitive coherence? And that will be on the 16th of February. And at this stage, I will be happy to take some questions. I will look at I'll stop sharing for now. Then I can take a few questions as they come in. You can use the the chat button to ask questions if you've got any. So I've got one question here from Kimbo York. That's the name of God. I hope I pronounced that right. Said, I apologize for being very busy, but this is not my area. That's fine. Is AIRC, AI-Enhanced Reflexive Control, a set of propaganda or more of a meta approach to information and the information literacy? That's a very interesting question. Thanks, Kimbo, for asking. I wouldn't call it a subset of propaganda in that sense. It's far broader, far more expansive than propaganda. It's a manipulation, if you like, of the information environment. The effect, whereas propaganda seeks to make us emotionally available to certain appeals. The essence of AI-enhanced reflexive control is to completely manipulate the information environment in a way that appeals appear to come from you. The source, the source is not known, but the target audience makes decisions based on what they think is right. The example I give often to students is I ask, how do I get you to take off your jacket, for example? I say, take off your jacket, and you don't want to take off your jacket. So how do I get you to take off your jacket? I can do that by turning the heating on in the room that you're in. I can either force you to do it, but I don't want to force, but I can turn on the condition of decision making. I can manipulate the space, your decision making process by turning on the heating in the room. And with the heating being on and the space becoming warmer, you then make the decision yourself. It becomes your own decision, whereas this was my planned decision from the onset. But instead of telling you to do that, I manipulated your environment of decision making so that the decision that you make seems to you as the right and logical decision to make under the circumstance. So that is essentially what reflective control looks like, and AI makes it incredibly effective because it enables the source to have such a deep understanding of the target audience's information environment to the extent of being able to manipulate them, create this illusion of coherence, of consensus around society, so that everybody feels or looks at things pretty much from the same perspective, or draw from the same source without knowing that they're drawing from the same worldview. So I see another question here. So this is very strategic and well organized and well financed misinformation campaign by the Russians. It feels very similar to the misinformation campaigns employed during recent American presidential elections. It is more than a political campaign, but a way to inspire conformity and a sense of belonging with the appearance of independent thinking. Are the techniques, in fact, the same? Indeed, indeed. The technique with AI with reflexive control is that it's in this case it's done by a foreign government targeting um, targeting another country and building not just one country, targeting countries that are within their sphere of influence to influence public opinion in that sense, or to influence collective attitudes at scale. In the case of the U.S. and political campaigns, it's there's a component of it that's being deployed. I can do a whole new lecture on that. What you see essentially is that the appeal is not the communication is not the instrument, is not the price tag is not on the piece of communication. It is the attitude towards that communication, the attitude towards the appeal. And there's been a lot of work that's been done to condition audiences to be open to specific kinds of appeals, so that you have politicians that then make those appeals. They make those appeals, and people would normally even cringe sometimes at some of those appeals or some of the statements made by politicians. But the fact is that the information condition, the information environment has been so conditioned that in some cases people are open to certain appeals. Their attitudes have been open in that sense. So the most complex, I would say, or the most successful communication campaigns are those that influence collective attitudes towards the message, not necessarily the message itself, but the attitude towards the message, the cognitive availability, the cognitive access to that message. But you're absolutely right about how well financed this is. It is sufficiently well financed. But with AI, you don't need tons and tons of millions of dollars to embark on operations of this nature. It can be done from an office in St. Petersburg or anywhere else for that matter. Right. So Kimber York is saying the difference between raw data and the environmental circumstances that creates data. That makes sense. I'm a librarian, so very interested in the information literacy aspect of this. Thank you. All right, excellent. Yeah, so yes, so it's that environment of decision making, the broad environment of decision making. Absolutely. I'd like to invite you to the next session, which will be a week from now. In that session, I will do a deep dive into what universities need to do, not just universities, academic institutions generally, and any other institution that's interested in defending democracy and the freedom to think, independence of thought. And that will happen next week, same time, Monday, next week, the 16th. So thank you very much for your time. We have reached the end of our time. And thanks to the audience for attending this webinar. Thanks for the time. So Alt Liberal Arts invites you to continue this groundbreaking series of webinars concerning the use of AI to attack the freedom to learn and democracy. I'll continue to share my research on the misuses of AI as a survival curriculum for the 21st century. So you can join us for my second lecture next Monday, the 16th of February at 12 p.m. EST. And you can register at altliberalarts.org. And all offerings are available free of charge. So you can also view past webinars, including this one, at Alt Liberal Arts YouTube channel. Thank you and goodbye.